Hello, Jason here. Welcome back to the channel. I hope everyone's doing okay, and hanging in there. Today I'm going to do a top 10 list, and what we're talking about today is going to be top 10 horror novels not written by Stephen King. I love Stephen King. I talk a lot about him on the channel here. I've got my Stephen King reading project videos. If you haven't watched those, I'll link them up here. You can check those out. And I'm wearing the shirt, but we're not going to talk about Stephen King today. We might talk a little bit about Stephen King, but mostly we're going to talk about other authors, and we're going to talk about books that are not written by Stephen King and things that I enjoyed. So these are all books I've read, obviously. And they are in no particular order. So we'll just go through the 10. I'll tell you a little bit about them, why I liked them, why I recommend them. So without further ado, here we go. First one is The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. Yeah, this book is great. It's good. If you've seen the movie, obviously you know kind of the gist of the story. I think it's about this girl who is exhibiting some really disturbing symptoms, and her mother is like, what's going on? And she takes her to all these doctors, and they can't figure out what's wrong with her, so eventually she goes to a priest and they perform an exorcism, and they think that she might be possessed by some kind of demon. So yeah, that's what it's about. And the book does a much better job of sort of being ambiguous and not very clear on whether it actually is a legitimate demon possession or just some kind of psychological or mental kind of illness that she's going through. Until, I think, the very end of the book. I think there is more of like a legit sort of answer to that, but yeah, I mean, for the most part, you're not really sure, and that's the scariest part. I think not only for like the girl, but like the mother is very torn because she's like an atheist and she doesn't believe in God, and she's like she's like, science can solve this, but then eventually she gets to her wit's end. And no doctors know what's going on. No one knows what's going on. So eventually she turns to this priest. And, yeah. And then it's also interesting. The priest is a character who's having his faith tested at the same time. So it's kind of, it's really just, it's a really interesting book. The characters are really good. It's a good one. So I highly recommend it. It's classic for a reason. Get out there and check it out. The next one is a book that I think is vastly underrated, that I don't really hear people talk about enough, in my opinion, but it's called The Devil of Nanking by Hayder. Yeah, this book is incredible. I loved this book. It's one of the books I read in the last 5 years that truly scared me. When I finished this book, I did not want to like turn the lights off. I was nervous about going to sleep at night. It actually scared me. And it's part mystery, part historical fiction, part kind of Yakuza, mafia, Japanese mafia type stuff. So it kind of weaves all these different sorts of things together beautifully. But basically what it's about is this girl, she's I think she's British. She goes to Japan to try to solve this mystery. She heard about this thing that happened during World War II, during the massacre at Nanking, which was an atrocity that occurred when the Japanese occupied China during World War II. They murdered a bunch of people in this town of Nanking, and she hears a story about something that happened there, and she wants to know if it's true. So she goes there to investigate. And yeah, it's set in the 90s, so it's set, significantly after the events that she's investigating. So that's one thing. She's trying to track down these people that were there. And they all kind of, like China and Japan have kind of, like, they pretend like that it never happened because they don't want that part of their past to be, like, acknowledged or whatever. They want to just forget about that because it was really bad. So it's, I don't know, it's just a really interesting book, and it's so good. And yeah, I highly recommend it. I've never read any of her other works, so I don't really know her style or if this is typical of her stuff, but if there's anything else that you guys have read from this author that you would recommend, please let me know in the comments, because I really, really enjoyed this book. Next is Red Dragon by Thomas Harris. And I'm going to go ahead and just recommend the whole trilogy of books. The Red Dragon and Silence of the Lambs and Hannibal. You don't have to read Hannibal Rising unless you're like a super fan and you really want to. It's not very good, but whatever. It's a prequel, so I would say this one's my favorite. Silence of the Lambs is probably my second favorite, and then Hannibal is also very good, but not really my favorite. Regardless, Red Dragon, so good. It's a serial killer book. It's an FBI kind of detective novel. It's different than a lot of kind of detective-y novels, though, because like as the reader, we know who did it. We know who the killer is, almost from the beginning, because there's a bunch of chapters in this book that are from his point of view, so we know who it is. The FBI obviously doesn't. And so that creates kind of this like interesting irony where we know things that the detectives don't. And sometimes you just want to like scream in their face about how obvious it is, but it's, whatever. So yeah, and obviously, this is part of the Hannibal Lecter series. So Hannibal Lecter is in this a little bit. Mainly, he's kind of a tertiary character in the background. He is a character that had a run-in with one of the investigators previously. And so, yeah. But, man, it's so good. And Introduction to Hannibal Lecter, Silence of the Lambs is amazing, the second book. So I'd say, yeah, just go ahead and just read the whole trilogy. But this book is great. Yeah. Next one is American Psycho by Bret, Easton, Ellis. It's been a while since I've read this book, but it's really good. It's, yeah, it's very disturbing. And, yeah, I mean, mostly it's about this guy. His name's Patrick Bateman. He is super rich, lives in New York in the 80s. He's in this culture of just very shallow, materialistic consumerism, where everything is a status symbol. Everything is tied to your, like, everything you own and how much it costs is directly tied to like your self-worth and things like that. And people are very shallow, and like everyone's kind of just like a clone of each other. They all look the same, they all dress the same, they all listen to the same music, they all go to the same restaurants every day. Like, they're just yuppies in New York that, whatever. And, but he has like a dark secret where he kills people for fun, as like a hobby. And does all kinds of crazy stuff. Like, he's a crazy person, but then, by day, he's just a regular, Wall Street, whatever, rich guy. And so, it's a really interesting look at the secret lives of people and how consumerism is meaningless and it's not who you really are. The shit that you own doesn't say anything about you. Really, because you got Patrick Bateman, who is a monster, but owns all this nice stuff, and that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't change the fact that he's a horrible person. So, it's a great book. Yeah, it's really good. The movie is quite good, too, although the movie is a lot more tame than the book, which is saying something, because the movie's pretty violent as well. But the book just takes it to a new level. There's a couple scenes in here that were, yeah, just hard to read, but definitely worth reading. I thought it was great. Next, it's a classic here. This is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This book is almost 200. It's over 200 years old, and she was like 20 when she wrote it, and it is just a banger still. It's so good, and it's super short, and this book is great. If you haven't read Frankenstein, just go out and do it. It's not very long, and you can find copies for like free on the internet because it's so old. Just go buy it. Just go get it and read it. Because, yeah, I mean, I'm sure pretty much everyone knows the story of Frankenstein at this point. You got Frankenstein, his doctor, creates a monster out of a bunch of dead bodies that he just sews together. And it's science fiction-y, but it's not very science-y. It doesn't go too in-depth into the process. It just talks about how he did this. So there's not a lot of like jargony stuff. But yeah, and then it's about how then, you know, the doctor abandons his monster, and then the monster kind of has to fend for itself and learn how to survive, and it doesn't know what's going on. It doesn't know anything. People treat him differently because he's ugly and looks like a corpse, and it's just really sad. Because the monster isn't the bad guy, but everyone treats him like the bad guy. The bad guy is Dr. Frankenstein for abandoning his creation, and it's a lot about like what do we owe our creation? Like what responsibility do we have if we were to create something, a life like that? What responsibility do we have? And yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's deep. To this day, I mean, it's still effective. So go read this book if you haven't. Okay, next one is my front page is coming out. House of Leaves by Mark Danielewski. This is I've recommended this on the channel before. Because it is an interesting book. It is unlike anything I've ever read. It's just strange. Formatting wise, it's very like part of the novel is the way that it's written. There's different fonts. There's footnotes. There's some of it is written in Braille, so you have to translate. Some of it is written in codes, so you have to translate. Some of it is in appendices that you have to flip to. You have to turn the book upside down sometimes. You have to read part of it in a mirror sometimes. It's very strange, and it requires a lot of legwork on the part of the reader to be able to get everything out of it. It's not a passive book. You have to really dig deep to figure it all out, but it's worth it. It's really, really good. And basically the story is it's like a haunted house story. It's about a house that's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. There's secret rooms. There's things that just don't make sense about it. And yeah, so there's multiple layers to this whole thing. It's the guy who lives in this house is a documentarian filmmaker. He starts making films about the house when he realizes what's going on, or he's trying to figure out what's going on, but he's documenting this whole thing. Then step back. There's a guy who is obsessed with this film. He just so happens to be blind, by the way, which is kind of funny, I think. And he takes endless notes analyzing this film, like frame by frame, meticulously picking this thing apart. And then he's got a trunk full of these notes. He dies. Some drug addict finds the notes, and then he gets obsessed with it. So there's like unreliable narrator elements to it. It's just a weird book, and it's just strange, but it's so good, and it's so worth your time. But it really does it's a commitment, and it takes a lot to really get into it. And in fact, it's been probably 5 or 6 years since I've read it. I should probably try to tackle it again at some point, because it really is just a fantastic book. So, House of Leaves, check it out. Next, we've got The Ruins by Scott Smith. This book is really gross. It is, body horror. That's what this is. It's gross. It's about a group of, I don't know, I guess they're college age people, students, whatever. They're like in Mexico. It's like two couples. They're in Mexico for vacation or whatever, and they're getting drunk every day, and they're doing whatever. And they decide, they meet this guy, he's like German or something, and they decide to go to these, like, into the jungle to find his brother. Because his brother ran off with some girl, and they're going to go see if they can meet up with him or whatever. And so they go out, and then they get kind of stuck. And I don't want to say too much, but they get stuck in this place, and then just horrible, horrible stuff starts to happen to them. Like, really horrible, and they can't escape. So they're stuck there. And, yeah, it's about these characters and how they start to break down. The stress levels are high, and they start to treat each other like shit. They start to distrust each other. They start to... their relationships start to break down. It's really, really upsetting in that way, because it's like these guys were friends, but then it really turns into this thing where they can't effectively make decisions together because they're all freaking out. And the ending is really, really depressing. And it's just gross, but it's so good, and it's vivid, and it'll make you cringe. But if you're into that, like me, if you like that sort of stuff, this is a must read. Like, this is some of the best body horror that I've read in a long time, and it is really well written. It's really good. So, yeah, The Ruins by Scott Smith. Recommend that. Next one. This one is also quite disturbing in a different way. But it's The Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum. It's not as gross. At least it's not as, like, descriptive of gore and things like that. It's gross in a totally different way. Basically what it's about is this girl and her sister. I think their parents died in, like, a car accident or something like that. And so they're staying with an aunt or something, like a family friend. I can't remember exactly, but they're staying with somebody, and she is crazy, and there's all these kids around. It's kind of rural, like out in the country, and there's all these kids around, and they're always at her house because she's got a bunch of kids, and like her house is like the meeting place where all these kids are during the summer, and they meet there, and then they go and play or whatever. But yeah, and then so these girls are there, and they just like part of their playtime is they just like torture her in the basement of this house, and the mom that's there, like the authority figure, kind of like eggs them on, kind of like makes them do it. Doesn't make them, but like encourages them to punish her for her whatever her misdeeds or whatever she perceives as being misdeeds. It's all made up. It's like she's just a 15-year-old girl. She's not doing anything wrong, but they punish her anyway, and so it's really upsetting. And so a couple things about this book. It's based on a real thing that happened. I don't know how closely the events of this book and the real events are, but I know that the girl was murdered. And yeah, so it's, you know, it's pretty screwed up that the stuff that happens in this book actually happened to somebody. And then it is fiction, but it's like non-fiction adjacent, I think. I'm not really sure. Like I said, I haven't researched too much into the actual story that this is based on, but yeah. And then the other thing is it's told from the perspective of one of the kids that's participating in the torturing. He's kind of passively participating, sort of, most of the time. He's just kind of watching it happen, but he doesn't do anything about it, and he feels bad about that, sort of. He also it's weird. He kind of gets turned on by it's a strange thing. He's very confused by the whole situation, and because it's told through his perspective, we as readers are meant to like kind of empathize with that, and like we feel while reading it, you feel like you're participating, and it makes you feel gross. And this is a tough one. It's not for everybody. I don't think everybody will like this book. In fact, I don't even think I liked it. I appreciate what it does, and it's very, very affecting. But it was a tough one. But I'm very glad I read it, so I do recommend it, as long as you kind of know what you're getting yourself into. So The Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum is a very good book. Next is I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. I did do a review of this on the channel, so I will put that in the up there. You can click on it. And yeah, basically it's a vampire story. The main character, as far as he's aware, he's the only human left. Everyone else has been infected by this disease that turns you into a vampire. Or a zombie, or something like that. It's mostly vampires, I think. But yeah, so I mean, he's immune somehow. He doesn't really know how, and he's trying to figure out, if there's a cure or some way that he can, whatever. He's trying to survive, but he's also, by himself. He's very lonely. He's very depressed. He drinks all the time. He's very hopeless, and any little glimmers of hope that he sort of sees throughout his experience either get taken away from him, and then he doesn't trust that anymore, or he doesn't trust it, and he's not able to enjoy anything. So it's very bleak, and yeah, it's just, but it's really, really good, and the ending is, yeah, really just it's a great ending. It's a great book. It's a lot different than the Will Smith movie. So even if you've seen that, it's not a bad movie. It's fine. But it's not really the same story. At least, elements of it, but mostly it's not really the same. So, and I haven't seen, there's 2 other movies based on it. One's called The Omega Man, and one is called The Last Man on Earth. I haven't seen either of those. So I can't really speak to that. But even if you've seen the Will Smith movie, I'd say go ahead, read this book. It's not very long, and it's so worth it. It's so good. Gosh. Okay. The last one on my list, and not the least. Like I said, these are in no order necessarily, but the last book is Swan Song by Robert McCammon. This is a masterpiece. It is so good. It is long. Very, very long. But just absolutely incredible. Setup is nuclear war breaks out in America. Pretty much everyone gets killed. There's, some survivors, obviously, and then it's about their struggle. It's also, a thing good and evil. There's some supernatural elements involved. And yeah, it's about how do we rebuild, how do we survive, how do we not give in to how do we beat the despair and the hopelessness and the temptation to turn to violence and that. So yeah, it's a serious book. It's very similar to The Stand, and I know I said I wasn't going to talk about Stephen King, but if you've read The Stand, you should really read this, because they're really similar thematically and just in general sort of plot. But yeah, gosh. In fact, if you haven't read The Stand, you should read The Stand, and then you should read this, and you should just read them back to back. Because yeah, they're both amazing. I don't know which one I like better. I like them both a lot for different reasons, and for the same reasons. They're just both. It's like they're like the same kind of. But anyway, this book is amazing, and it got me into Robert McCammon. This is the first book that I read of his, and yeah, he's so good. He's become one of my favorite horror authors. So anyway, that is the list. So let me know if you've read any of these, if you agree with this list, if there's anything else you think I maybe left out, or suggestions that you think I should read. If it's a really good book and I left it out, chances are I maybe haven't read it yet. So leave it in the comments and let me know, because like I said before in previous videos, and whatever, I'm always looking for more stuff to read. I'm always trying to expand my horizons, and so even if it's non-horror related, I read other stuff too. So but anyway, thanks for watching, and like and subscribe if you like stuff like this, and yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.